Sometimes the most painful choices are the ones we make out of love. My name is Martha Jean Thompson, and I'm 87 years old now. The lines on my face tell a story of both joy and pain, though for many years, the pain overshadowed everything else. I was born in a small town called Sun City in Arizona back in 1938, during times when women were expected to be satisfied with marriage and motherhood. Perhaps that's why I stayed silent for so long. I met Richard in the spring of 1953. I was just 15 years old, working at my father's drugstore after school. Richard was 22, handsome in his army uniform, having just returned from serving in Korea. He had these piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through you, and a smile that could charm anyone in town. He'd come in every Thursday afternoon for a chocolate malt, and he'd always leave me a generous tip, winking as he walked out the door. My parents were cautious at first. He was older, after all. But Richard knew how to win people over. He brought my father expensive cigars and helped my mother carry groceries. "Such a gentleman," my mother would say. "You don't find many like him these days." By the time I turned 17, my parents had given their blessing for us to court properly. We married in June of 1956, right after I graduated high school. I still remember my white dress with the lace collar, how my hands trembled as I held my bouquet of white roses and lilies. Everyone in town came to the wedding. Richard was well respected, working at the local bank by then. People said I was lucky to have found such a good man. I believed it too. For the first year, our marriage was everything I dreamed of as a young girl. Richard bought us a small house on the outskirts of town, with a front porch where I'd sit in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in shades of orange and purple. We'd talk about having children, about the life we'd build together in this community. Richard would bring me wildflowers he'd picked on his way home from work, and on weekends, we'd drive to the nearby lake for picnics. The first time he hit me was 2 weeks after I told him I was pregnant. I had burned his breakfast. The eggs were too hard, the toast too dark. It happened so fast. 1 minute I was apologizing. The next I was on the floor, my cheeks stinging, ears ringing. Richard immediately dropped to his knees beside me, crying, begging forgiveness. "I don't know what came over me," he sobbed. "It'll never happen again, Martha. I swear on my life." I believed him. I had to. There was a baby coming, and in 1957 divorce wasn't something respectable women considered. Besides, I loved him. And when he wasn't angry, he was the same charming man who'd won my heart. But it did happen again and again. Always followed by tears, by promises, by periods of perfect happiness that made me believe things were finally changing. I learned to hide the bruises with makeup, to tell neighbors I'd walked into a door when they noticed my split lip or black eye. "I'm just so clumsy," I'd laugh, while Richard would put his arm around me protectively. When Michael was born in January 1958, I thought things would get better. For a few months, they did. Richard would come home from work and cradle our son, singing lullabies in a voice so tender it brought tears to my eyes. "This is what I've always wanted," he'd whisper. "You've given me everything, Martha." Then Richard lost his job at the bank. He said it was downsizing, but years later I learned he'd been caught taking money from customer accounts. He started drinking heavily, disappearing for days at a time. When he came home, the slightest thing would set him off. Michael crying, dinner not being ready, me asking where he'd been. The first time he hurt Michael, our son was just 18 months old. Michael had knocked over Richard's whiskey glass. Richard grabbed him by his little arm so hard it left finger-shaped bruises. When I tried to intervene, Richard threw me against the wall, knocking the wind out of me. "If you ever try to leave me," he hissed that night as I lay crying in bed, "I'll find you, and I'll make sure you never see that boy again. Maybe he won't be around for you to see it all." I knew he meant it, the way his eyes looked when he said it, cold like a snake's. I knew it wasn't just the alcohol talking. For 3 more years, I endured it. I tried everything, being the perfect wife, keeping Michael quiet when Richard was home, reaching out to my pastor who told me to pray harder and be more submissive. Nothing helped. My salvation came in the form of my sister Caroline, who lived in Minneapolis. She'd come to visit for Michael's 4th birthday and immediately noticed something was wrong. When Richard went out drinking that night, Caroline confronted me. At first, I denied everything. It was shameful, admitting your marriage was a failure, that you couldn't protect your own child. But Caroline wouldn't leave it alone. She showed me the way Michael flinched whenever a door slammed, how he went quiet when Richard's name was mentioned. "This isn't just about you anymore, Martha," she said. "What kind of man will Michael grow up to be if this is all he sees?" That night, after Caroline had gone to sleep in our guest room, I sat by Michael's bed, watching him sleep. His dark lashes rested against his cheeks, his little chest rising and falling. A bruise was still visible on his forearm from where Richard had grabbed him 3 days earlier. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. If you're enjoying this story, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support means the world to me. The next morning, while Richard was at his new construction job, I told Caroline my plan. She thought I was crazy at first. "You're going to do what?" she'd asked, her coffee cup stopping halfway to her lips. "I'm sending Michael with you to Minneapolis," I repeated. "I'll tell Richard he's just visiting, that he'll be back in a few weeks. By then, I'll have figured out how to get away safely." "Martha, this is insane. Come with us now, both of you." I shook my head. "You don't understand. If we both disappear, he'll never stop hunting us. He has friends in the police department. He'll say I kidnapped his son. But if I stay, if I can convince him that I've accepted things, I can plan properly. Save money. Find somewhere he'd never think to look." Caroline argued, but eventually understood. The desert had taught me patience. Sometimes to survive, you have to play the long game. We packed a small suitcase for Michael, telling him he was going on a special vacation with his aunt. I put his favorite teddy bear on top, along with a photo of me. The hardest part was keeping my tears from him as I hugged him goodbye. "When are you coming, Mommy?" he asked, his small arms wrapped around my neck. "Soon, sweetheart," I promised. "Mommy has some important work to do here first, but I'll come for you. No matter what, I will come for you." That night, when Richard came home, I told him Caroline had taken Michael for a visit. As expected, he flew into a rage, throwing furniture, threatening to kill me. But when I didn't fight back, when I simply said, "He'll be back in 2 weeks," Caroline just wanted some time with her only nephew, Richard eventually calmed down. 2 weeks, he said, pointing his finger in my face. Not a day longer. What Richard didn't know was that Caroline and Michael were already on a bus headed for Minneapolis, and that I had no intention of bringing my son back to this hell. The next 15 years were the hardest of my life. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Richard's rage when Michael didn't return was unlike anything I'd experienced. I ended up in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a fractured cheekbone. I told the doctors I'd fallen down the stairs. They didn't question it. Richard called the police, reported Michael kidnapped. But Caroline had prepared. She'd gotten documents showing she had permission to care for Michael. A friend at the courthouse had helped her, backdating papers with my signature. The investigation eventually fizzled out, and I stayed. I endured Richard's beatings, his verbal abuse, his control. I secretly wrote letters to Caroline's neighbor, who would pass them to my sister, who would read them to Michael. I couldn't risk writing directly to them. Richard checked the mail religiously. Years passed. The beatings became less frequent as Richard drank more, becoming too intoxicated to do much more than shout. I worked at the local diner, hiding money in a hole beneath the floorboards of our bedroom closet. $1 at a time, I built my escape fund. And with every penny saved, I whispered to myself, one day closer to Michael. What I didn't know then was that the letter that would change everything was already on its way to me. A letter that would finally give me the strength to leave. What does it mean to be a mother when you can't hold your child? When you only know them through words on paper and distant memories? Every night for 15 years, I went to sleep with the same prayer on my lips. Keep him safe. Let him know he's loved. I'd lie in bed beside Richard, his breath heavy with whiskey, and I'd silently recite everything I could remember about Michael. The way his hair curled at the nape of his neck, how he'd scrunch his nose when he laughed, the sound of his voice calling me Mommy. I was terrified of forgetting. Sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, I'd trace the outlines of his face in my mind, panic rising when certain details became fuzzy. Did his eyes have that gold fleck in the left iris, or was it the right? Did his laugh have that little hiccup at the end? Or am I mixing that up with the neighbor's boy? The letters were my lifeline. Every month, if I was lucky, I'd receive one from Mrs. Abernathy, Caroline's neighbor, who had agreed to be our secret conduit. She'd send innocent-looking envelopes addressed from a Quilting Circle newsletter. Richard never suspected a thing. He'd toss the mail on the kitchen table and return to his newspaper or bottle. Inside each envelope was news of my son. Michael lost his first tooth. Michael started kindergarten. Michael joined the Cub Scouts. Each milestone I missed was a knife in my heart, but also proof he was alive, growing, thriving. Caroline was raising him well. He asks about you, Mrs. Abernathy wrote in 1962. Caroline tells him you're sick and can't travel, but that you love him very much. He keeps your picture by his bed. I had to be careful with these letters. I'd read them once, memorize every word, then burn them in the kitchen sink while Richard was at work. I couldn't risk him finding them. The ashes would swirl down the drain, but the words stayed with me, treasures I could revisit in my darkest moments. In 1963, when President Kennedy was assassinated, the whole country was in mourning. Richard stayed home from work for 3 days, drinking and watching the television coverage. He was particularly volatile during that time, the national tragedy somehow becoming personal to him. He smashed our television set when they showed Kennedy's funeral. I had to clean up the glass while he passed out on the couch. During those years, I aged decades. By 1965, at just 27, strangers often thought I was in my late 30s. The constant stress, the hypervigilance required to navigate life with Richard, the grief of separation from my child, they all etched themselves into my face, into my very bones. I worked at Rosie's diner 6 days a week. Rosie herself was a tough old bird who didn't ask questions when I showed up with bruises. But she'd give me extra shifts when Richard went on his benders and sometimes slipped me a little extra cash. For your rainy day fund, she'd wink. She didn't know what I was saving for, but she knew I needed an escape route. The diner became my sanctuary in a way. There, I could be Martha the waitress, efficient, pleasant, normal. Customers would chat with me about the weather, compliment my coffee refill timing, leave me tips with genuine smiles. For 8 hours a day, I could pretend I was just an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. It was at the diner that I met Dr. Sarah Cohen in 1968. She was new in town, setting up a small medical practice. Unlike the other doctors in our conservative community, she was a woman, unmarried, and didn't attend church. The town gossips had a field day. Dr. Cohen would come in every Wednesday for lunch, always ordering the same thing: a turkey sandwich on rye, no mayo, and black coffee. She'd bring medical journals, reading while she ate. One day, she looked up as I refilled her coffee and said, "That wrist needs an X-ray." I'd sprained it the night before when Richard had twisted my arm behind my back. I'd wrapped it tightly with an ace bandage and come to work anyway. "It's nothing," I said quickly. "Just clumsy me." She held my gaze for a long moment, then said quietly, My office is open until 7 on Thursdays. No appointment needed. I never went to her office. I couldn't risk Richard finding out. But Dr. Cohen kept coming to the diner, and sometimes she'd leave pamphlets under her plate with her tip. Information about a women's shelter in Phoenix, about legal aid. I'd quickly pocket them, heart racing, and read them in the bathroom during my break before destroying them. Through all this, Michael was growing up. The letters told me he was doing well in school, particularly in mathematics. He'd joined the baseball team. He had his first girlfriend at 13, a girl named Penny with red hair and freckles. Caroline made sure he got braces when he needed them, took him fishing on weekends, helped him with homework. He's becoming quite the young man, Mrs. Abernathy wrote in 1970. He's taller than Caroline now. His voice has changed. Caroline says sometimes when he's concentrating hard on something, he gets this little furrow between his eyebrows, just like you. That letter made me sob so hard I had to run the shower to mask the sound. My baby wasn't a baby anymore. He was 16, almost a man, and I had missed it all. The hardest part was knowing he might hate me. What had Caroline told him as he got older? Did he understand why I'd sent him away but stayed behind myself? Or did he think I'd abandoned him? The thought tortured me. Richard's violence ebbed and flowed over the years. As the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, he drank more but hit less. He'd lost his construction job and now worked sporadically when someone was desperate enough to hire him. Our house, once the pride of my housekeeping efforts, deteriorated along with our marriage. The desert sun blistered the paint, the roof leaked, the yard became overgrown with scrubby desert plants. I kept working, kept saving. By 1973, I had nearly $3,000 hidden in that hole beneath the floorboards. A fortune by my standards, earned 1/4 tip at a time over 15 years. I was 45 years old, with gray streaking my once auburn hair and lines mapping my face. But the money represented freedom, and every time I added to it, I felt a spark of the young girl I once was, the one who dreamed of happiness. I had a plan. Michael would be turning 20 soon. Once he was grown, once he was safely established in his own life, I would leave. Richard wouldn't be able to hurt him anymore. I'd go somewhere far away, maybe Oregon or Washington, where I heard the trees grew so thick they blocked out the sun, where it rained enough to wash away the desert dust and memories. My 46th birthday passed without celebration in February 1974. Richard forgot, as he had for many years. Rosie gave me a cupcake with a single candle at the end of my shift. "Make a wish, honey," she said. I closed my eyes and wished the same thing I'd wished for 15 years, to hold my son again, just once. A week later, I came home from work to find Richard passed out on the couch, as usual. I quietly hung up my coat, slipped off my shoes, and checked the mail that had been pushed through the slot in our front door. Bills, advertisements, and a letter with unfamiliar handwriting. The return address made my heart stop. It was from Minneapolis, but not from Mrs. Abernathy. This letter was addressed directly to me, from Michael Thompson. My son had found me. With trembling hands, I slipped the letter into my pocket and went to the bathroom, the only place in our small house where I could count on a few minutes of privacy. I locked the door, turned on the faucet to mask any sound, and carefully opened the envelope. "Dear Mom," it began, and those two simple words nearly broke me. I had to press my hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. The letter that would change everything was now in my hands, and as I read my son's words for the first time in 15 years, I knew my life would never be the same again. Some letters are just ink on paper. Others rewrite your entire existence. I sat on the cold tile floor of our bathroom, my back against the peeling wallpaper, reading and rereading my son's words until they blurred through my tears. "Dear Mom," the letter began. "Aunt Caroline thinks I shouldn't write this. She says it might put you in danger. But I'm 20 now, and I deserve to know the truth. I deserve to understand why my mother sent me away, but wouldn't come herself. I have questions that only you can answer." His handwriting was neat, precise, like watching a stranger's hands move across the page. This was my son, yet not the little boy I remembered. This was a man's writing, a man's thoughts. "I've known pieces of the story for years," he continued. "Aunt Caroline tried to protect me when I was younger, telling me you were sick, that you'd come when you could. But as I got older, I started asking harder questions. Last year, on my 19th birthday, she finally told me everything. About Richard, about the abuse, about the choice you made to save me while staying behind yourself." My chest ached as I pictured Caroline sitting my boy down, explaining the ugliness of the world, shattering whatever innocent ideas he might have had about his absent mother. "I was angry at first," Michael wrote. "Angry that you didn't fight harder, that you didn't come with me that day, that you chose to stay with a monster rather than be with your son. I couldn't understand what kind of mother would make that choice." Each word was a deserved blade between my ribs. How many times had I asked myself the same questions? Was I a coward? Should I have risked everything and run with him? But then Aunt Caroline showed me the letters. All the letters you'd written over the years that Mrs. Abernathy passed along. She'd kept every single one. She showed me how you'd numbered them, just in case they arrived out of order. There were 172 letters, Mom. 172 pieces of your heart that you sent across the country to a son who couldn't write back. I pressed my hand against my mouth, stifling a sob. Caroline had kept them all? I'd imagined her reading them to Michael when he was small, then discarding them. The thought that she'd preserved this paper trail of my love overwhelmed me. "I read them all in one weekend," Michael wrote. "I learned how you worked double shifts to save money for an escape, how you celebrated my birthdays in secret, how you kept track of every milestone even though you weren't there to witness them. In one letter from 1965, you described how you'd walk by the school when children were at recess, just to hear the sound of kids my age playing." I remembered that letter. It had been a particularly dark time. Richard had broken my collarbone the week before, and the pain medication had made me melancholy, more vulnerable in my writing than usual. "In your letters, I found the mother I never knew. The woman who sang, 'You are my sunshine' to herself on my birthday each year. The woman who kept a pebble I'd given her when I was 3 in her work apron pocket, touching it like a talisman throughout the day. The woman who endured hell so that I wouldn't have to." A loud snore from the living room startled me. Richard was still passed out. But for how long? I needed to finish reading, to memorize every word before I had to destroy this precious connection to my son. "I'm studying engineering at the University of Minnesota," Michael continued. "I have a scholarship. Aunt Caroline says I get my brains from you, that you were always reading, always curious about how things worked. I have your eyes," she says, "and your stubbornness. But I wouldn't know. I only have one photograph of you, the one you tucked into my teddy bear when I left. It's faded now, worn from handling. I tried to picture him, 20 years old, in college, studying complex equations and building the future. My beautiful boy, safe and educated, with opportunities I could never have given him here. Mom, I've waited long enough. I don't want to just read about your life anymore. I want to be part of it, and I want you to be part of mine." My heart thundered in my chest. What was he saying? So this isn't just a letter. It's a rescue mission. The next paragraph explained everything in precise detail. Dates, times, locations. Michael had planned my escape. He and Caroline had been working on it for months. They'd rented an apartment in Seattle, where Caroline's sister lived. They'd secured me a job interview at a bookstore owned by a friend of the family. They'd even consulted with a lawyer about how to protect me legally if Richard came looking. "We'll be in Phoenix on April 17th, he wrote. "We've booked 2 rooms at the Holiday Inn on Central Avenue. I'll wait there while Aunt Caroline comes to get you. All you need to do is be ready. Pack only what you can carry in one bag. Leave while he's at work or asleep. Take a bus to Phoenix, we've enclosed the fare, and call this number from the station. Paper-clipped to the letter was $30 and a business card with a phone number written on the back. If April 17 doesn't work, we'll wait. A day, a week, a month. However long it takes. But please, Mom, don't make it another 15 years. I've lived most of my life without you. I don't want to miss any more. The letter ended simply. I love you. I forgive you. Come home to me. Your son, Michael. I folded the letter with trembling hands, pressing it to my heart. April 17th. That was just 3 weeks away. After 15 years of planning and saving and surviving, my salvation had a date on the calendar. But could I do it? Richard had been increasingly unpredictable lately. His drinking had worsened, and he'd developed a paranoia that hadn't been there before. He'd accused me of having affairs, of stealing his money, of poisoning his food. Just last week, he'd grabbed my arm hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises when he thought I was taking too long at the grocery store. What if he caught me trying to leave? What if he followed me to Phoenix? What if he found Michael? The familiar fear began to crawl up my spine, the same fear that had kept me trapped for so long. It would be safer to stay. Safer for Michael if I remained Richard's prisoner. Wasn't that what I'd told myself for 15 years? But as I reread the letter, something shifted inside me. My son was no longer the vulnerable child who needed protection. He was a man now, making his own decisions, taking his own risks. And he'd chosen to risk himself for me. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. Really looked, for the first time in years. Gray hair, lines etched deep around my eyes and mouth, shoulders permanently curved forward as if perpetually bracing for a blow. I was 46 years old. How many more years would I sacrifice to fear? A memory surfaced. Something Dr. Cohen had said to me last year when I'd finally broken down and visited her office during one of Richard's out-of-town benders. She'd wrapped my sprained wrist properly and said, "The most dangerous time for any woman in your situation is when she decides to leave. But the second most dangerous is every single day she stays." I tucked the letter into my bra, close to my skin. Then I flushed the empty envelope down the toilet and ran water in the sink to wash away any lingering tears. When I emerged from the bathroom, Richard was still snoring on the couch, an empty bottle on the floor beside him. I went to our bedroom and lay down on my side of the bed, staring at the ceiling. April 17th. I repeated the date in my mind like a prayer, like a promise. For the first time in 15 years, I allowed myself to imagine a different life, one where I could wake up without fear, speak without calculating the risk of each word, exist without constantly monitoring another person's mood. A life where I could finally be Michael's mother again. The next morning, Richard woke with his usual hangover, grumbling and hostile. I kept my head down, made his coffee exactly how he liked it, endured his complaints about the eggs being too runny. Every moment felt surreal. I was moving through familiar motions while carrying this enormous secret. I had a plan. I had a future. In just 3 weeks, I could be free. I went to work at the diner as usual, but everything felt different. The familiar faces of regular customers, the routine of filling coffee cups and taking orders, it all had an air of finality. I found myself noticing small details I'd overlooked for years. How the desert light streamed through the blinds in the late afternoon, creating patterns on the Formica countertops. The way Rosie hummed along to the radio as she worked the grill. The particular squeak of the swinging door between the kitchen and dining room. These would all be memories soon. Just 3 more weeks of this life. I didn't dare write to Michael. Any outgoing mail might be intercepted by Richard. Instead, I focused on subtle preparation. I worked extra shifts, explaining to Richard that Rosie was short-staffed. The additional money went directly into my escape fund. I inventoried my possessions mentally, deciding what few items I could justify taking with me. The wedding ring would stay. Let Richard pawn it if he needed money. The few pieces of jewelry I'd inherited from my mother would come. Small, valuable, easily transported. Clothes could be replaced, but photographs couldn't. I had a handful of pictures of my parents, of my childhood, of Michael as a baby. Those would come with me, tucked inside my one dress with pockets. As the days ticked by, I became increasingly nervous. Richard seemed to be drinking less, watching me more. Had he noticed something different in my behavior? Was my hope visible somehow, betraying me with a lightness in my step or a gleam in my eye? One evening, about a week before my planned escape, he cornered me in the kitchen. "You've been acting strange," he said, his breath hot on my face. "Got something you want to tell me, Martha?" My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "No," I managed to say, keeping my eyes down. "Just tired from the extra shifts." He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him. "You better not be planning anything stupid. You know what happens to women who try to make fools of their husbands." I did know. I'd seen it firsthand when our neighbor Mrs. Daniels had tried to leave her husband in 1968. She'd ended up in the hospital with a broken jaw, and Mr. Daniels had told everyone she'd fallen down the stairs. No one questioned it. "I'm not planning anything," I whispered. "Where would I go? I don't have anyone." He studied my face for what felt like an eternity before releasing me with a shove. "Damn right you don't. Remember that." That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, wondering if April 17th was a fantasy I'd never realize. Was I being watched? Had Richard somehow intercepted Michael's letter? Was my son already in Phoenix, waiting for a mother who would never arrive? The fear nearly paralyzed me. But then I remembered something from one of Dr. Cohen's pamphlets. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the face of fear. I had 3 choices. I could stay and die slowly in this prison of a marriage. I could try to run and possibly die quickly if Richard caught me. Or I could trust the plan, trust my son, and perhaps, just perhaps, finally live. As the week progressed, I made my final preparations in absolute secrecy. I hid small amounts of money in different places on my body. Sewn into the hem of my uniform, tucked into the lining of my work shoes, folded into a sanitary pad that I knew Richard would never touch. I memorized bus schedules. I casually mentioned to Rosie that I might need some time off soon for a woman's procedure. She nodded sympathetically, no questions asked. And then, suddenly, it was the day before, April 16th, 1974. One more night in this house. One more night of pretending. One more night of fear. As I served customers at the diner, I silently said goodbye to each familiar face. Goodbye to the booth where Mr. Henderson sat every morning with his newspaper and black coffee. Goodbye to the corner table where the ladies from the beauty parlor gathered on Wednesdays for pie and gossip. Goodbye to Rosie, who had been the closest thing to a friend I'd had in 15 years. I didn't dare tell anyone I was leaving. The fewer people who knew, the safer Michael would be. The safer I would be. That evening, I cooked Richard's favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes and carrots. I wore the blue dress he liked. I laughed at his jokes, ugly as they were. I was the perfect, submissive wife. One last performance before the curtain fell. When he asked me to fetch him another beer, I did so without complaint, even as my mind screamed that this was the last time, the very last time, I would ever serve this man. As I handed him the cold bottle, our fingers touched briefly. He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the charming young man who had once swept me off my feet. It vanished quickly, replaced by the hard eyes of the stranger he'd become. "What's got you smiling?" he demanded. I hadn't realized I was. I schooled my features quickly. Just thinking about how to fix that tear in your work shirt tomorrow. I lied smoothly, years of practice making the deception effortless. He grunted, apparently satisfied, and turned his attention back to the television. Later, as I washed the dishes, I looked out the kitchen window at the desert night. The stars were impossibly bright against the black sky. Somewhere out there, my son was waiting for me. After 15 years of darkness, dawn was finally breaking. Tomorrow, the letter that had changed everything would fulfill its promise. Tomorrow, I would finally be free. There are moments when time seems to stop, when past and future collapse into a single heartbeat of possibility. April 17th, 1974, dawned like any other day in Arizona, the sun rising harsh and golden over the desert landscape. But for me, it was the day the world would change forever. I woke before Richard, my entire body humming with adrenaline. I'd barely slept, drifting in and out of nervous dreams. The clock read 5:17 a.m., still dark outside, the house silent, except for Richard's heavy breathing beside me. I lay still, rehearsing the plan in my mind. Richard would leave for his construction job at 6:30. I would go to work at the diner as usual for my morning shift. At noon, I would tell Rosie I wasn't feeling well. Not a complete lie, as my stomach was already churning with anxiety. Then, instead of going home, I would retrieve my hidden money from beneath the floorboard, collect the small bag I'd stashed behind the water heater in the garage 3 days earlier, and walk to the bus station downtown. If everything went according to plan, I would be in Phoenix by 3:30 p.m. I would call the number Michael had provided. By dinner time, I would be with my son for the first time in 15 years. So simple on paper, so terrifying in reality. Richard stirred beside me, and I immediately closed my eyes, pretending to sleep. He grunted, rolled over, and the bed creaked as he stood. I listened to his footsteps padding to the bathroom, the sound of water running, the flush of the toilet, ordinary morning sounds that had been the soundtrack to my imprisoned life. I waited until I heard him in the kitchen before I rose, dressing quickly in the uniform I'd laid out the night before. Nothing unusual, nothing that would trigger his suspicion. I joined him downstairs, made his coffee, fried his eggs, buttered his toast, the same routine I'd performed thousands of times before. "Working late tonight?" Richard asked, not looking up from his newspaper. My heart stuttered. "No, just the morning shift." "Why?" He shrugged. "Thought Rosie might need extra help. It's Friday." "She hasn't said anything," I replied, keeping my voice level while my mind raced. Did he suspect something? Had he somehow intercepted Michael's letter after all? "Well, if she asks, you should take it. We could use the money." He drained his coffee cup and stood, grabbing his lunch pail from the counter. "Don't wait up if I'm late. The guys were talking about getting a drink after work." Relief flooded through me. He was planning to go out drinking, which meant he wouldn't be checking on me until much later tonight. By then, I would be long gone. "Have a good day," I said, the same words I'd said every morning for nearly 2 decades. He grunted in response and left without a backward glance. The front door slammed, and I heard his truck engine rumble to life, then fade as he drove away. I stood in the kitchen, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what I was about to do. My legs felt weak, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. Was I really going to leave? After all these years of planning and dreaming and saving, was I brave enough to actually walk out that door and never return? Michael's letter was still tucked inside my bra, close to my heart. I took it out and reread it one more time, drawing strength from his words. "I love you. I forgive you. Come home to me." I folded it carefully and returned it to its hiding place. Then I washed the breakfast dishes, wiped down the counters, and straightened the living room. One last act of the dutiful wife I would never be again. My shift at the diner passed in a blur. I moved on autopilot, pouring coffee, taking orders, making small talk with the regulars. Every time the bell above the door jingled, I jumped, half expecting to see Richard storming in, somehow aware of my plan. But it was never him. Just customers coming and going on an ordinary Friday. At precisely noon, I approached Rosie at the grill. "I'm not feeling well," I said, pressing a hand to my stomach. "Would it be all right if I left early?" Rosie squinted at me, her lined face concerned. "You do look pale, honey. Go on home and rest." "Thank you," I said, and on impulse, I reached out and squeezed her weathered hand. For everything, something in my tone must have alerted her. She studied my face intently. "Martha, is everything okay?" For a moment, I was tempted to tell her everything. About Michael, about my escape plan, about the new life waiting for me in Seattle. But the fewer people who knew, the safer we all would be. "Everything's fine," I assured her. "Just a stomach bug, I think." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "Take care of yourself, you hear?" I changed out of my uniform in the employee bathroom, putting on the plain dress and cardigan I'd brought with me. Nothing distinctive, nothing memorable. Just another middle-aged woman going about her business. Instead of turning left toward home when I left the diner, I turned right, heading downtown. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Each step took me farther from my past and closer to my future. And with each step, I expected to feel a hand on my shoulder, to hear Richard's voice demanding to know where I thought I was going. But no one stopped me. No one even gave me a second glance. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as I walked the 10 blocks to our house. The neighborhood was quiet, most people at work or staying inside to escape the heat. I slipped around to the back of the house, using the key hidden under the flower pot to let myself in through the kitchen door. The house was silent, empty. I moved quickly to the bedroom closet, pried up the loose floorboard, and retrieved my escape fund, $3,142 saved over 15 years of secret planning. I stuffed the money into different pockets of my clothing, not wanting to keep it all in one place. Then I went to the garage, pushed aside the rusty lawn equipment, and pulled out the small suitcase I'd hidden days earlier. Inside were a few changes of clothes, my mother's locket, the handful of photographs I couldn't bear to leave behind, and a book of poetry that had been my companion through the darkest nights. I took one last look around the house that had been my prison for so many years. The faded curtains, the sagging couch, the water stain on the ceiling that Richard had promised to fix 5 years ago. Nothing here belonged to me, not really. Nothing here was worth staying for. I closed the door behind me without looking back. The walk to the bus station took 20 minutes. Each step felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Was this how inmates felt when released from prison? This strange mixture of disbelief and fragile hope? At the station, I purchased my ticket to Phoenix, my voice steady despite the thunder of my pulse in my ears. The clerk barely looked at me, just slid the ticket across the counter with a bored expression. I was nobody special, just a woman taking a bus trip on a Friday afternoon. The bus was half empty. I chose a seat near the middle, not too conspicuous, and placed my small suitcase on the rack above. As the engine rumbled to life and the bus pulled away from the station, I finally allowed myself to exhale. I was doing it. I was really doing it. The Arizona landscape rolled by outside the window, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels, red rock formations rising majestically in the distance, the endless blue sky stretching to forever. For 15 years, this harsh landscape had been the backdrop to my imprisonment. Now it was the scenery of my liberation. The journey to Phoenix took just over 2 hours. As the bus pulled into the terminal, my anxiety returned full force. What if Michael wasn't there? What if this had all been some cruel joke or terrible mistake? With trembling hands, I collected my suitcase and stepped off the bus into the busy Phoenix terminal. Following the instructions in Michael's letter, I found a payphone and dialed the number with fingers that didn't seem to belong to me. It rang once, twice, 3 times. My throat closed with panic. Then a woman's voice. "Hello? Caroline?" My voice cracked on her name. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Martha? Is that you?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm here. I'm in Phoenix." Her voice shifted, became brisk, efficient. "Stay exactly where you are. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I'm driving a blue Ford Mustang." The line went dead, and I stood clutching the receiver, my knees weak with relief and terror. 15 minutes. After 15 years, just 15 more minutes. I sat on a bench outside the terminal, my suitcase clutched on my lap, watching every car that approached. A blue Mustang pulled up to the curb, and a woman stepped out. Tall, with auburn hair streaked with silver. Caroline. My sister. 15 years older, but instantly recognizable. Our eyes met, and time seemed to stop. Then she was rushing toward me, and I was standing, and we were clinging to each other, both of us crying. "You came," she kept saying. "You really came." "Is he here?" I asked, pulling back to search her face. "Is Michael here?" She nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "At the hotel. He wanted to come, but we thought it safer if I came alone." Less conspicuous, she helped me into the car, stowed my small suitcase in the trunk, and drove with a confidence I'd forgotten women could possess. The Phoenix streets blurred past as she navigated through traffic, occasionally glancing at me as if to reassure herself I was really there. "He's so nervous," she said with a small laugh. "He's been pacing the hotel room all day. I told him to take a swim in the pool, try to calm down, but he wouldn't leave in case you called." I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight with emotion. "He's amazing, Martha," Caroline continued, perhaps understanding I needed to hear about my son. "Brilliant, kind, stubborn as all get out. He gets that from you. He's going to graduate top of his class next year. Engineering firms are already recruiting him." Pride swelled in my chest. My son, my beautiful boy who had grown into a man while I lived another life. "Does he—" I swallowed hard. "Does he hate me for staying away so long?" Caroline's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "He did, for a while, when he was younger and didn't understand. But not anymore. Now he just wants his mother back." The Holiday Inn appeared ahead, a multi-story building with a neon sign. Caroline pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Room 215, she said softly. "He's waiting for you." My legs felt like water as I walked through the lobby, rode the elevator to the second floor, moved down the carpeted hallway. Room 215. I stood before the door, frozen, unable to lift my hand to knock. What if he was disappointed when he saw me? What if the reality of his broken-down, middle-aged mother didn't match whatever image he'd carried all these years? Before I could retreat, the door opened, and there he was, tall, taller than I'd imagined, with broad shoulders and Richard's strong jawline, but my eyes, my mother's curly hair, 20 years old, but with something ancient in his gaze as he looked at me. "Mom?" he said, and his voice was a man's voice, not the little boy's voice that had lived in my memory. "Michael," I whispered. We stood frozen, a universe of loss and longing between us. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, and I was enveloped in the embrace of my son, my child who was no longer a child. "You came," he said into my hair, echoing Caroline's words. "You really came." And I broke. 15 years of fear and courage and sacrifice and loss poured out of me as I clung to him, sobbing with the force of a dam breaking. He held me, this strong young man who had once been small enough to carry on my hip, his own tears falling silently. "I'm sorry," I kept saying. "I'm so sorry I sent you away. I'm sorry I stayed behind. I'm sorry for all the years we lost." He pulled back, framing my face with his hands. hands that were larger than mine now, a man's hands. "Don't," he said firmly. "You saved my life. You did what you had to do. I understand now." Caroline slipped into the room behind us, quietly closing the door. The three of us sat together as the afternoon turned to evening, talking, crying, sharing the separate lives we'd lived. Michael showed me photographs, him growing up, graduating high school, his college dormitory. Caroline filled in the gaps of the stories I'd only known through letters. "What happens now?" I asked eventually, the question that had haunted me since I'd first received Michael's letter. "Richard will look for me." "Let him," Michael said, a hardness in his voice that reminded me too much of his father. "We've thought of everything. The apartment in Seattle is in Caroline's name. The job is arranged through a friend who knows to be discreet. We've consulted a lawyer about a restraining order, and Phoenix police are already watching the bus station in case he follows your trail here," Caroline added. "But we're not staying long enough for that to matter. Our flight to Seattle leaves tomorrow morning." Seattle. A city of rain and trees and water. A place where Richard would never think to look for a woman who had spent her entire life in the desert. "What about you?" I asked Michael. "Your studies in Minnesota?" He smiled. My smile, I realized with a jolt of recognition. "I'm transferring to the University of Washington for my senior year. I'll only be 30 minutes from your new apartment." It was too much to absorb, too perfect to believe. "Why are you doing all this?" I asked, overwhelmed by their planning, their generosity, their forgiveness. Michael took my hand, his expression serious. "Because you're my mother. Because for 15 years you endured hell to keep me safe. Now it's my turn to keep you safe." Later that night, after Caroline had gone to her own room, Michael and I sat on the balcony of the hotel room, looking out at the Phoenix lights, so different from the stars above our small desert town, yet beautiful in their own way. "I have something for you," Michael said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn teddy bear, the same one I had tucked into his suitcase 15 years ago when I sent him away. "You kept it," I whispered, taking it with reverent hands. "Of course I kept it. It was from you." He hesitated, then added, "There's something inside." I turned the bear over and noticed that the seam along its back had been carefully opened and re-sewn. Gently, I parted the stitches and reached inside, pulling out a folded piece of paper. It was the photograph I had given him, the only image of me he'd had for 15 years, faded, creased, worn thin from handling, but still me, smiling at the camera, holding baby Michael in my arms. "I looked at it every night before I went to sleep," Michael said quietly. "I was afraid I'd forget your face." I couldn't speak through my tears. I carefully refolded the photograph and tucked it back into the bear, my trembling fingers struggling with the small opening. "You don't need to put it back," Michael said, covering my hands with his. "You're here now, the real thing." That night, I slept better than I had in 15 years, knowing my son was safe in the next bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring a new life far from Richard's reach. For the first time since I was a young girl, I allowed myself to dream of a future. Morning came, bright and full of promise. As we checked out of the hotel, headed to the airport, boarded the plane to Seattle, I kept expecting something to go wrong, for Richard to appear, for police to stop us, for this beautiful dream to shatter. But nothing went wrong. The plane took off, Arizona falling away beneath us, the vast landscape of my imprisonment shrinking to a distant patchwork of desert and mountains. "Look," Michael said, pointing out the window as we flew north. "It's raining up ahead." I peered past him to see dark clouds in the distance, the shimmer of rainfall beneath them. Rain, something I'd almost forgotten in the arid Southwest. Rain to wash away the dust, to nourish new growth, to begin again. As our plane descended through those clouds toward Seattle, toward my new life, I thought about the letter that had changed everything. How words on paper had finally given me the courage to leave, to reclaim myself, to become a mother again after 15 years of empty arms. I reached for Michael's hand, marveling at how it engulfed mine now, at how our roles had somehow reversed. He the protector, I the protected. But there was comfort in that reversal, a rightness to it. I had kept him safe when he was small and vulnerable. Now he would help keep me safe while I learned to be strong again. "Welcome home, Mom," he said, as the wheels touched down on the rainy Seattle runway. Home, not a place, but a person. My son, the child I had sent away to save, the man who had returned to save me. At 46, most women weren't starting over. Most weren't rebuilding a relationship with an adult child they barely knew. Most weren't learning how to live without fear for the first time in decades. But then, most women hadn't made the choice I had made all those years ago. The impossible choice between staying with my child and keeping him safe. Most women hadn't lived with the consequences of that choice for 15 long years. As we stepped out of the airport into the gentle Seattle rain, I turned my face upward, letting the droplets mingle with my tears. Water to wash away the desert dust, to cleanse the past, to baptize me into this new life. Michael put his arm around my shoulders, sheltering me from the rain with his jacket. "Are you ready?" he asked. I looked up at my son, my beautiful, grown son who had never stopped loving me, never stopped searching for me, never given up on me even when I had almost given up on myself. "Yes," I said, my voice strong and clear. "I'm ready." And together, we stepped into the future that love had made possible, that courage had earned, that forgiveness had blessed. Together, at last, we walked home. Thank you for watching this true story to the end. If this journey touched your heart, please subscribe to hear more stories from grandmothers like Martha. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear a message of hope and courage. We'll be back next week with another incredible story of survival and strength.